Imagine walking into the grand mansion of a man known for power and control, only to find him collapsed on the bathroom floor, his shoulders shaking, clutching a photo to his chest. What secret could break the strongest man alive, and what happens when someone dares to witness his hidden pain? If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. Sana walked quickly down the quiet street, the thin brown folder held firmly in her hands. It was late, far too late for a normal office errand. The message had come only an hour earlier. Her employer's voice clicked and cold over the phone. Darian Hale, the man who commanded boardrooms and headlines, had given her an unusual order. Bring the file tonight. Leave it in my room if I am not available. She had worked for him for nearly 3 years. In that time, she had learned that his instructions were not suggestions. They were commands, precise, sharp, and unquestionable. But tonight felt different. It was past 10 o'clock when she reached the gates of his mansion. The guard at the entrance barely spoke, only checked her identification and waved her through. Normally, the grounds glowed with light. Staff moved about quietly, carrying out endless tasks. But tonight, the estate was silent, its wide windows dark. Her heels clicked against the stone as she walked up the marble steps. Every sound echoed in the empty air. She felt the weight of the folder growing heavier, as if it carried more than just documents. The massive front doors opened with a slow creak. She stepped inside, and the silence deepened. The entrance hall stretched before her, lined with paintings and chandeliers that no longer shone. It felt like stepping into a museum, closed for the night. The air was cool, the kind that made her skin tighten. She paused, unsure if she should call out. Her voice seemed too small for the vast space. Sana thought of her employer's tone earlier. There had been no warmth, but then again, there never was. Darian Hale spoke to everyone the same way, efficient, detached, as if emotion were a weakness. Many in the office feared him, and she understood why. He was a man of strict order, a figure who demanded excellence. But behind the name, behind the power, whispers followed him. Whispers about the wife he had lost years ago. Whispers about a tragedy no one dared discuss aloud. Tightening her grip on the folder, Sana moved deeper into the hall. Her steps were the only sound, bouncing off the polished floors. The grand staircase stood before her, its railings gleaming in the dim light. She hesitated, her instincts telling her she was intruding. But his instructions had been clear. To the left, a long corridor stretched toward the main bedroom wing. She turned that way, her breath steady but shallow. Portraits lined the walls, eyes of strangers watching her pass. One door stood slightly open, a sliver of light cutting across the dark floor. Her heart quickened. That had to be his room. Carefully, she pushed the door open wider. "Sir?" she called softly. No answer. The bedroom lay before her, immaculate and cold. The bed was untouched, the sheets smoothed, as though no one had rested there for months. Every piece of furniture seemed perfectly placed, lifeless. Her gaze drifted to a photo frame on the dresser. It showed a smiling woman, her arm looped through Darian's. Her belly was round with pregnancy. Sana swallowed hard and turned away quickly. Then she heard it. A faint sound, muffled, broken. She froze, listening. It came again, low and trembling. The sound of a man's voice carried through the stillness. The noise pulled her toward another door at the far side of the room. The bathroom door. Frosted glass separated her from the source of the sound. Through the blur of glass, she could make out a figure. Darian Hale, dressed in his dark suit, sat on the tiled floor. His shoulders shook. In his hand, pressed tight against his chest, was a frame, the shine of its edges catching the light. Sana's breath caught. This was not the man she knew from the office, not the ruthless leader whose words silenced boardrooms. This was a man undone, broken, weeping in solitude. For a moment, she stood frozen. She knew she should leave, that this moment was private, too raw for her to witness. But something inside her kept her rooted. The grand halls, the silent mansion, the powerful man undone by grief. It all pressed in around her. The folder in her hands felt insignificant now. What she had stumbled upon was not a business transaction or a late-night errand. It was a secret, a truth hidden behind the walls of wealth and power. And as she stood outside the frosted glass, she understood something with chilling clarity. She had walked into a house of silence, but what she found inside was louder than anything she had ever known. The story was only beginning. Darian looked up sharply when the soft click of the door reached his ears. His eyes, red and swollen, locked on Sana. The mask he wore every day, the one built from steel and pride, was gone. What remained was raw and unguarded. "What are you doing here?" His voice rasped, but even in its brokenness, it carried the sharp edge of command. "Leave now. Drop the file on the bed and get out." Sana's hands trembled, but she did not move. Every instinct told her to obey, to step back into the safety of the hallway and pretend she had seen nothing. Yet her feet held her in place, as though compassion had rooted her to the spot. "Sir," she whispered, her voice steadier than she expected, "I can't leave you like this." His eyes blazed, fury rising to mask his grief. "I gave you an order," he snapped, his voice low and dangerous. "Do not disobey me." Her breath caught, but still, she did not retreat. "And I am disobeying it," she said softly, surprising even herself, "because no one should have to face this kind of pain alone." For a long moment, silence filled the room. The only sound was the uneven rhythm of Darian's breathing. Then, to her shock, he let out a harsh, broken laugh. It was a sound more painful than his tears. He pressed the photo frame against his forehead, his knuckles white as he clutched it. "You think you know me, Sana? None of you know me. You all see the man in the suit, the one who closes deals, the one who never bends. But you don't know what I carry. You don't know what happened that night." Sana felt her heart pound. Carefully, she stepped farther into the bathroom and closed the door behind her. She crouched down, leaving enough space between them to show respect, but refusing to walk away. "Then tell me," she whispered. For the first time, his gaze met hers directly, without the usual shield of indifference. His lips trembled as he began to speak. "It was our anniversary," he said slowly, as if each word cut him open. "She planned everything, the dinner, the music, the candles. She asked me to come home early, just for one night. I promised her I would." His voice broke, and he shook his head violently. "But I wasn't there. I told myself it was just one meeting, one deal. I'd only be an hour late." His shoulders hunched as though the weight of his words pressed him down. "She waited for me. She was exhausted, but she stayed up. She fell asleep in the chair. When she woke, she must have tried to stand. She fell. She hit the floor. Her stomach," his voice cracked, the pain spilling out like an open wound. Sana pressed her hand to her mouth, tears burning in her eyes. "I came in just as it happened," he continued, his words ragged. "I carried her to the car, drove like a madman. But by the time we reached the hospital, she had already passed out. They couldn't save her. They couldn't save either of them. My wife, my child, both gone because of me." The last words came out in a choked sob. "I killed them, Sana. I killed them with my selfishness." Sana's tears spilled freely, but her voice held steady. "No, no, you didn't." He glared at her, his eyes fierce through the blur of tears. "I wasn't there when she needed me. That's the truth. I chose work over her, over them, and now I live with nothing." His cry echoed in the marble room, heavy with grief. She leaned closer, her tone both gentle and firm. "You loved her. That's what matters. Love doesn't vanish because tragedy came. Love cannot be erased by guilt." He shook his head violently, anger mixing with sorrow. "Don't call it tragedy. It was negligence. It was me being a selfish man who thought profit was more important than family." Without thinking, Sana reached out. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the first time she had ever touched him outside of work. He flinched, then stilled. "Darian," she said softly, "if she were here, would she want this? Would she want to see you broken, destroyed, punishing yourself every day?" His face, twisted with grief, silence stretched, his breathing ragged. Finally, in a whisper that barely carried, he said, "I don't know how to live without her." The confession pierced her heart. In that moment, she did not see the feared magnate everyone else whispered about. She saw a man drowning in guilt, clinging to sorrow, because it was the only piece of his wife he still held. Sana's grip tightened gently on his arm. "Then let someone help you remember how." For the first time since she had known him, Darian didn't push her away. He let the silence linger, allowed her presence to soften the sharp edges of his grief. And for that fragile moment, he was no longer entirely alone. The next morning, the office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones rang, papers shuffled, and conversations carried on in hushed tones. But to Sana, nothing felt the same. She sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, her hands still. The memory of the night before clung to her like a shadow. She had seen Darian Hale, the man known for power and control, broken and grieving on his bathroom floor. It was an image she could not shake. When Darian walked in, his suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. His expression carried the cool detachment that everyone recognized. To anyone else, he looked unchanged, as though the night had been nothing more than a dream. But Sana saw it. She noticed the faint redness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched for a fraction longer than usual, the stiffness in his shoulders. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said softly, handing him the folder for the day. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he pulled back quickly, his mask snapping into place again. Throughout the day, he commanded the office with the same sharp precision as always. Meetings filled the hours, instructions delivered with his usual authority. Yet Sana felt the undercurrent, a quiet shift beneath the surface. Staff whispered in corners, sensing something unspoken. They noticed how Sana lingered outside his office, a moment too long, how his eyes flickered toward her when he thought no one else was watching. That evening, long after the others had gone, Darian called her into his study. The city lights glowed through the tall windows, painting the room in silver. He stood by the desk, his back straight, but there was a heaviness in his eyes. "You didn't tell anyone," he said. His voice was low, tense. "No," Sana replied at once. "I would never." He nodded slowly, his shoulders loosening just a little. "Good, because no one needs to know." "Then, we will begin playing no." She hesitated before speaking. "You can't carry this alone forever." For a moment, he looked at her, his gaze full of exhaustion and something more vulnerable. Then he turned away, as if afraid of what might show if he let her see too much. In the days that followed, a quiet pattern began to form. At night, when the office emptied and the silence stretched, Darian would call her in. Their conversation started with work, but wandered to other places, memories of his wife. The little details of her laughter, the dreams they had shared but never fulfilled. One night, he led her deeper into the mansion than she had ever been. They stopped before a locked door, one he had never shown to anyone. With slow, reluctant hands, he turned the key and pushed it open. Inside, the room felt frozen in time. The walls were painted in warm colors, the shelves stacked with tiny baby clothes folded neatly. A crib stood in the corner, draped with a pale blanket. A soft, floral scent lingered in the air, untouched by the years. "She chose everything," Darian said quietly. "Every piece of furniture, every shade of paint. She wanted it perfect before the baby came." His voice cracked as he moved around the room, his fingers brushing the crib's edge. "I haven't touched anything since that night. Sometimes I come in here, but only to punish myself, imagining what should have been." Sana's throat tightened, her eyes blurred with tears. She stepped closer, her voice trembling but steady. "You don't have to punish yourself to honor her memory. You can remember her with love, not with pain." He laughed bitterly. "Honor? What kind of man honors his wife by letting her die alone?" "You didn't let her die," she said firmly. "It was an accident, a tragedy, but it wasn't your choice." He turned sharply toward her, anguish etched across his face. "Then why do I feel like I might as well have pushed her?" Sana reached out again, her hand resting gently on his. His skin was cold, tense, but he didn't pull away. "Because you loved her," she said softly. "Because losing her broke you. But guilt doesn't bring her back. It only buries you deeper." For the first time, his composure shattered fully. His breath came in ragged gasps, his eyes glistening with tears. He gripped her hand as though it were the only thing holding him upright. "I don't know how to stop," he whispered. "Then let someone help you," Sana murmured, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. They stood there in silence, hand in hand, the room heavy with unspoken grief and fragile hope. That night, when Sana finally left the mansion, the air outside felt different. The sky stretched dark above her, but she sensed the smallest shift, as though the weight he had carried alone for years had begun to lighten, just a little. The steps were fragile, uncertain, but they were steps toward healing. The days that followed carried a quiet shift in Darian's world. At the office, his voice still held authority. His decisions were still sharp, but the edges of ice seemed softer. For the first time in years, staff noticed him pause to say thank you or ask a small question that wasn't tied to profit. Whispers spread, but no one dared to speak too loudly. They all sensed something was different. Through it all, Sana remained at his side. She still carried files, scheduled meetings, and kept his world running like clockwork. But beneath the surface, their connection had deepened. Late at night, their conversations stretched beyond work. Sometimes, they spoke of his grief, other times about life, memories, or the uncertain future neither of them had dared imagine. Still, Darian wrestled with guilt. Though his mask cracked more often, he continued to cling to the belief that moving forward was betrayal. One evening, long after the office emptied, he asked Sana to meet him outside the mansion. His expression was unreadable as he guided her through quiet streets until they reached the cemetery gates. They walked side by side down the winding paths until they stopped before a polished stone. Etched on its surface was his wife's name, and beneath it, the words, "Beloved child, gone too soon." Darian sank to his knees, his hand trembling as he touched the cold marble. "I failed you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I promised to protect you, to be there, and I wasn't. I let you down in the worst way." Sana stood a short distance away, her heart aching, tears stinging her eyes. "But I can't live like this anymore," Darian continued, his voice steadier, though still raw. "I've carried guilt like armor, but it's only crushed me. You loved me too much to want me this way. I know that now." With slow hands, he slipped his wedding ring from his finger. He stared at it for a long moment, the weight of years pressed into that small band of gold. Then, gently, he placed it on the headstone. "I'll always love you," he said softly, "but it's time I start living again. Not forgetting, just living." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind brushing through the trees. Sana stepped forward, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. This time, he didn't flinch. Instead, his hand turned upward, finding hers. When he rose to his feet, his eyes glistened, but there was something new in them. A fragile piece, the first she had ever seen. "She'll always be part of me," he murmured, his voice quiet but steady. "But I think she would want me to move forward, to find light again." Sana's voice trembled as she asked, "And you think I could be that light?" He turned to her, his gaze steady, vulnerable. "I don't just think, I know." Her breath caught. For a moment, fear pulled at her. Fear of judgment. Fear of stepping into a place she had never imagined. But then she saw him, not the ruthless magnet the world knew, but a man who had survived unbearable loss and was daring to open his heart again. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "So am I," he replied. Then, for the first time since she had known him, a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "But maybe we can be scared together." Their fingers intertwined slowly, the simple gesture heavy with meaning. In that quiet moment, they were no longer employer and assistant. They were two people choosing to step into the unknown, guided by hope. As they left the cemetery, the sky stretched wide above them, painted with the colors of fading sunlight. Each step felt lighter than the last. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness no longer felt like a tomb. Darian allowed the staff to return fully, and one evening, he joined them at the long dining table. Laughter filled the room when he joked about his inability to cook, a sound the house had not heard in years. At the office, his authority remained, but his presence no longer filled the halls with dread. People spoke freely, worked with less fear, and even smiled in his presence. He still demanded excellence, but his tone carried respect instead of cold detachment. Through all of it, Sana remained steady. Their bond deepened in quiet moments, late-night talks, shared walks, small exchanges of trust. What had begun in grief was slowly shaping into something new. One evening, as she gathered papers in his study, Darian stood by the window, watching the city lights. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Sana," he said quietly, "would you have dinner with me? Not here, not for work, just the two of us." Her hand stilled on the folder. She met his gaze and after a long pause, smiled. "I'd like that." Relief flickered across his face, but he said no more. The moment carried its own weight. Later that night, as he walked her to her car, Darian looked back at the mansion. For years, it had been a prison of grief, but now it no longer felt that way. He was ready to let go of the pain that had chained him, ready to remember without destroying himself, ready to live again. And for the first time, he was not walking alone. And so, what began in silence and sorrow became a journey of healing, courage, and new beginnings. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe, like, and share this story to inspire others. Until next time, stay hopeful and keep believing in second chances.